Please leave a comment where you are watching from. I was 8 the year my father decided Thanksgiving needed to be unplugged. No screens, no traffic, no neighbors, no Gatlinburg tourist traps. Real forest, he said at dinner one night, like he'd just invented it. Not the pretend kind. No distractions. Mom clapped her hands like he'd just suggested a trip to Paris. It'll be peaceful, she said. Like a retreat. Yoga, but with bears. The cabin wasn't ours. It belonged to someone from Dad's office. A procurement guy named Bruce, who only ever spoke in monosyllables unless it was about power drills or battlefield tours. Bruce called it off-grid but operational, which apparently meant the walls were upright and the roof mostly held rain. We left before sunrise that Friday. Dad packed the car like a survivalist prepping for the end of the world. Duffels full of thermal underwear, granola bars, and thick wool blankets that smelled like attic dust. My older sister, V, and I were handed mismatched thermoses of cocoa and told to embrace the wilderness. She rolled her eyes. I just watched the scenery blur. Gas stations gave way to cow pastures. Cow pastures turned into forest, then thicker forest, then roads so narrow the trees seemed to lean over us. By the third time the GPS said rerouting, V stopped asking how much longer. Eventually, Dad turned onto what looked more like a washed-out fire trail than a driveway. Gravel snapped under the tires. A deer crossed in front of us, slow, like it had nowhere to be. It looked at us once before vanishing into the trees, and the branches swayed back behind it like a curtain closing. We reached the cabin as the light was dying. It sat low in a hollow, hunched between the pines like it was ashamed to be seen. There were no other homes in sight. No power lines, no mailbox. The whole thing looked swallowed by time. Inside, it smelled like mildew and mothballs, old flannel and wet stone. The kind of place where if you turned the light on, you almost expected it to flicker like in a horror movie. But the lights worked. So did the wood stove, after Dad grunted and cursed and made a fire the real way, like a pioneer with a temper. V and I picked bunks. Mine faced the slope. Hers looked into a thicket. We argued over who had the better view until Mom threatened to confiscate the Uno deck. Dinner was chilly from a cast iron pot and biscuits that tasted like hockey pucks. We played cards by firelight. V fell asleep with a yellow reverse stuck to her forehead. I stayed awake just long enough to watch the flames dim. And then, sometime later, could have been midnight, could have been 2, I heard the footsteps. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Slow, deliberate. Not animal sounding. Not the patter of paws or the scuttle of raccoons. Just 2 legs. Heavy. I sat up, held my breath. My bunk creaked. The sound stopped. I crept to the window, lifted the corner of the blind just enough to peek. Nothing. Just woods. Endless black trees. But something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your skin tighten, even when your brain can't give you a reason. Then I heard it again. This time slower. 1 step. Drag. Pause. Step. I shook V awake. There's someone outside. She groaned, rolled away. V, I whispered. Get up. Look. She sat up, blinking hard. We crept to the window together. At first, it looked like more trees. Then our eyes adjusted. There, just beyond the tree-line, was a shape. Not moving. Not swaying. Just watching. No light, no moon. But somehow, we knew it was looking at us. We dropped to the floor so fast we scraped our elbows. Crawled across the room. Whispered guesses back and forth. A tree? A trick of light? But I'd looked earlier. There'd been nothing there. I didn't sleep. I kept waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. By morning, the whole thing felt like a dream. The kind that sticks to your skin even in daylight. I smelled bacon. Mom was singing off-key. V had gone back to sleep, curled under the covers. I went outside to find Dad. He was out back chopping wood. There was a man standing next to him. A little too close. He was shorter than Dad but thick around the middle, like someone who used to be strong but had gone soft in the wrong places. He wore a faded camo jacket zipped to the neck and a patch on the sleeve I couldn't read. His skin was waxy. Hairless. The kind of pale that looks refrigerated. This is my boy, Dad said, waving me over. The man smiled. Too wide. Lips moved. Eyes didn't. Name's Camden, he said. Good to meet you. Hi, I muttered, standing half behind Dad. Camden nodded slowly. You look nervous. Just cold, I lied. He chuckled once. Combat stress, he said, to no one in particular. Old ghosts. Dad clapped him on the shoulder like that was perfectly normal. Camden said he and his wife and daughter were staying up the ridge. Thought he'd come say hello. Dad, being dad, invited him in for breakfast. Camden sat across from me and asked weird questions. If I played sports, if I liked hiking, if I ever explored alone. I didn't like how often he looked at me, like he was measuring something, or waiting for me to check a box. Mom didn't notice. She just kept offering syrup and asking about local firewood prices. After we ate, I went outside to get away from him. I slid down the slope behind the cabin, messing around in the snow. Kicked a clump of ice. Slipped. Smashed my knee into a rock. Blood trickled down my shin. And like he'd been waiting for it, Camden appeared. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't answer. He crouched beside me, reached out. "Let me take a look." He examined the scrape, then said, "I've got first aid stuff at my place. Come on, it's close." And I followed. We walked uphill, then along a narrow, twisting path. I remember ducking under a branch and smelling something old. Wet wood. And something worse underneath. "How much farther?" I asked. "Almost there," he said. He said it again 5 minutes later. It took 20. The cabin was a ruin. Crooked, leaning hard to one side. Boards warped. Porch chewed and splintered. Windows boarded up like a crime scene. No lights. No smoke. No sound. I stopped walking. "Where's your family?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Out walking," he said. "They'll be back soon." He opened the door and stepped in. I followed. It was cold. Like basement cold. The air smelled like mildew and rotten meat. Inside, the furniture was overturned. Blankets in piles. Kids' clothes strewn on the floor. Not fresh. Not clean. He led me to a chair. Knelt beside me. Started bandaging my knee. His hand lingered too long. "You've got strong legs," he said. I jerked away. "I need to go." "No rush," he said. "Stay for lunch." Then he stood between me and the door. "My parents will be looking for me. They know you're with me." Something creaked behind him. A door opened. A woman stepped out. She looked like a ghost still pretending to be alive. Skin tight against her bones. Hollow eyes. Lips cracked and bleeding. "Help me," she whispered. Camden turned. "Get back inside." She didn't move fast enough. He lunged. Grabbed her arm. Threw her through the door and slammed it shut. Then he turned back to me. "She's sick," he said. "Don't mind her." His eyes dropped to my coat. "Want to try on a jacket?" I bolted. Yanked open the front door and ran. Branches tore at my face. Blood dripped from my knee again. I didn't stop. Behind me, boots pounding. Camden shouting. I found the path. Followed it. Recognized the curve in the trees. Saw the clearing. The cabin. I screamed. Dad burst onto the porch with the axe still in his hand. "Reed!" I shouted. He took me. He wouldn't let me leave. I collapsed into him. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled me inside, locked every door, and called the sheriff. They arrived 2 hours later. Deputies in tan coats and muddy boots. They hiked up the ridge. The cabin was empty. No Camden. No woman. But they found rope. Zip ties. A child's shoe. The property had been abandoned for over 5 years. No utilities. No records. No known owners. We left that night. Drove through the dark without stopping. Dad didn't speak until we reached a real gas station. The sheriff never called back. No one ever followed up. I was 33, and by then I'd spent nearly a decade working with the Department of Natural Resources in one capacity or another. Mostly backcountry assessments, trail erosion reports, wildlife impact monitoring. That kind of thing. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but I preferred the solitude of the field to the buzz of a fluorescent-lit cubicle any day. That spring, I got assigned a solo detail in the Smoky Mountains to monitor a sloped region just off Porter's Creek. Some unauthorized campsites had been popping up, and the rangers wanted fresh eyes on the erosion damage before it got out of hand. I was told I'd have a partner this time, an intern from a university in Georgia. Kid named Mason Winter. 23, enthusiastic, one of those people who wears energy like a cologne. Always filming things for a nature YouTube channel no one had heard of. Real-world experience, the lead ranger said with a shrug, handing me the clipboard. I've never minded working alone, but Mason wasn't terrible. He talked too much, always had something wild to show me on his GoPro, and liked to narrate everything out loud, like his whole life was a documentary. But he worked hard, carried his own weight, and didn't whine about the hike. The area we were monitoring wasn't exactly accessible. The nearest trailhead was 5 miles from where the illegal campsite started, and from there it was all bushwhacking and old, washed-out fire roads. The cabin we were staying in was a historic forestry post, one of those tilted, moss-covered, half-rotted structures that had been standing since the 30s and looked like it wanted to give up. No power, no plumbing, no cell service, not even a proper lock on the door, just a bent metal latch you could drop a chunk of firewood into from the inside. "Looks like something out of a ghost story," Mason said when we first stepped inside. "You think it's haunted?" "There's not even a floorboard that's flat enough to creak," I said, brushing a spiderweb off the doorframe. He grinned and started filming immediately. "First night in the wild," he said to the camera. "No service, no distractions. Let's see what nature has to say." The first 2 nights were uneventful. We hiked out early, flagged the campsite damage, logged GPS coordinates, took soil samples. I didn't say much, and Mason filled the silence by telling stories or brainstorming content ideas for his channel. We'd be back at the cabin by sunset. Make instant meals by headlamp, heat up coffee in tin mugs. He'd talk about video thumbnails and algorithms. I'd tune out and clean my boots. Then the 3rd night happened. It was just past midnight. I'd been lying in my sleeping bag for hours, drifting in and out of that light, twitchy half-sleep you get when the wind howls just right and the wood stove keeps sighing. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Not animal-like. Not the rustle of raccoons or the scamper of deer. This was pacing. 1 step. Then pause. Another. A rhythm. Too slow to be 4-legged. Too heavy to be random. I sat up quietly, the old canvas crackling beneath me. I didn't want to wake Mason. I moved toward the warped window, the one on the rear side facing the woods. I couldn't see anything. The glass was too distorted, like looking through melted ice. My reflection stared back at me, warped and distant. Then I heard breathing. Not panting. Not gasps. Just slow, wet inhales, like someone with bronchitis trying not to cough. I didn't mention it the next morning. What would I say? I'd already seen the way Mason handled mystery. He'd probably grabbed the GoPro and run out there yelling like it was a prank. Instead, I hiked behind the cabin after breakfast and looked for signs. And I found them. Footprints. Clear as anything. Depressions in the moss, wide and deep, leading from the forest directly behind the cabin and stopping maybe 10 feet from the wall. No exit trail. Just ended. I stood there for a long time. Then I brushed leaves over the prints and walked back inside. That night, I didn't sleep in the cabin. I took my sleeping bag and hiked back to the truck. We'd parked it about a 1/4 mile downhill near a collapsed footbridge and a cluster of old birch trees. I cracked a window, curled up in the passenger seat, and left the keys in the ignition. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt safer. More solid. Until about 1 a.m. That's when I heard the gravel crunch. Then the creaking wood of the bridge. Slow steps. Heavy again. One after the other. Then silence. Then breathing, right next to the driver's side window. Wet. Calm. Human. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I couldn't see anything outside the glass, just black. Then something dragged across the passenger side window. Not a claw. Not a knock. A slow, soft smear. Like skin. Like fingers testing the glass. I turned the key. Engine roared to life. Headlights snapped on. And there was nothing. Just trees. The breathing was gone. When the sun rose, I opened the door and got out. My legs were stiff. My spine ached from the seatbelt digging in all night. Then I saw it. 20 smooth river rocks, arranged in a spiral behind the truck. Not randomly scattered, placed. Deliberately. Not one footprint near them. Just the rocks. When I got back to the cabin, Mason was boiling water for oatmeal. He grinned. "Sleep in your truck, old man?" I didn't answer. He joked that maybe we were being haunted by a raccoon with a vendetta. I let it go. A few nights later, I heard the steps again. But this time, they weren't pacing. They were coming straight down the hill, direct, purposeful, closing in. I could feel it. The shift in the air. The hum under my skin. Then the breathing again. Right outside the truck. Then a hard shove on the driver's door. Not enough to cave it in. Just enough to test it. I turned on the brights. Still nothing. The next morning, Mason looked exhausted. "Slept like garbage," he muttered. "Thought I heard something around 4 a.m. You hiking again?" I didn't reply. He kept filming. 2 days later, he installed motion cameras. "Let's see what our nocturnal neighbor looks like," he said, trying to sound casual. A week passed. Then one night, the truck alarm went off. Once. Then again 2 hours later. Then again right before dawn. On the third time, Mason ran outside with a flashlight. Nothing in sight, but the passenger side mirror had been folded in. Not broken, just adjusted, as if someone had wanted to look at themselves. The next morning, he showed me the camera footage. 15 seconds. Timestamp 3:04 a.m. Grainy image. Trees swaying. Then something moved. Low to the ground. A figure crouched between two trees. Human-shaped, but wrong. And just before the video cut out, it looked directly at the camera. And it smiled. I was 15 that fall, still convinced I could survive on comic books, trail mix, and stubborn silence. My parents had rented a cabin near Elkmont for the weekend. One of those last-minute retreats my dad called disconnecting from the noise, which always translated to no phone service and at least one passive-aggressive meltdown. The cabin wasn't fancy. No hot tub. No TV. Just a sagging porch swing, a rusty stove, and windows set high and narrow like the place had once been a deer blind. It sat off a gravel road that twisted so hard the GPS gave up and froze. There were no visible neighbors. No engine noise. At night, when the sun went down, it felt like the trees folded over us. No porch light. No glow from distant houses. Just dark. Thick enough to make you hear things that weren't there. Mom loved it. She called it peaceful. Dad grunted and pulled out a deck of cards. We'd only been there a day when Mom found a local newsletter in the glove box. Some folded half-page filled with ads for farmers markets, bee pollen, and rustic arts events. Near the bottom, in that blurry print that looks like it was copied 100 times, was a little blurb. Appalachian threads, fabric, notions, and heritage quilting supplies. Specializing in hand-dyed mountain prints and antique textiles. Off Route 74 beside King's Gas. That was all she needed. Let's check it out, she said, folding the page and stuffing it in her coat. Dad didn't even flinch. I'll drive, he said. But I'm not getting out. He'd brought a stack of hunting catalogs and could disappear into them for hours. I shrugged. I didn't have a better plan. It beat sitting on the porch pretending I could write something meaningful in a spiral notebook I'd only brought to feel like a misunderstood genius. The place took longer to find than expected. We passed it once, doubled back, and almost missed it again. It didn't look like a fabric shop. More like a converted storage unit stuck next to a gas station, whose pump handles looked older than me. There was no sign. Just quilts pinned in the windows like insulation. The Coke machine out front was faded pink from sun damage. I could tell you the price of a soda, but not if it still worked. I'll be right here, Dad said, cracking his window and already thumbing through a page on elk rifles. Inside, the store was quiet. Wooden floorboards. The kind that flexed and sighed when you stepped wrong. It was longer than it was wide. Tall bolts of fabric stood in rows that nearly touched the ceiling. Some were organized. Most weren't. The whole shop smelled dry, like old cloth, attic dust, and something faintly sweet underneath. Mothballs, maybe. There was no music. No clerk at the counter. Mom drifted toward the back like she'd been summoned. I stayed near the front, flipping through a bin of fabric scraps. Most were just squares of flannel or faded holiday prints. But one caught my eye, a deep red plaid with a silver streak in one corner. The kind of pattern that made you think of superheroes and danger. I imagined it tied around someone's neck as a cape. Folded it once. Held it up to the light. That's when I heard the door creak. But it wasn't behind me. It was right beside me. "You like comics?" a voice asked. Too close. Too casual. I turned. A man stood across the bin. Khaki pants. Navy windbreaker zipped halfway. Hair parted too neatly. Smile shaped like he'd practiced it in the mirror. He looked like he belonged in a commercial for aftershave or dental insurance, ordinary to the point of discomfort. But something about him didn't sit right. He didn't fit. Not in a place like this. Not between bolts of flannel and hand-stitched signs that said things like, "Stitch happens." He didn't feel like a shopper. He felt like someone waiting for something. I didn't answer. I took a step to the side. He mirrored it. "You here on vacation?" he asked. I still didn't speak. My fingers tightened on the red fabric. His smile never wavered. "I got something you'd like," he said. "Come see." He started moving around the bin. I stepped back again. He moved faster, closing the gap like he was tracing my path with invisible string. The space between the shelves was narrow. I knew we couldn't pass without touching. I turned slightly, as if looking for another aisle. He adjusted again, blocking the opening. That's when I felt it. The air pressure shifted. My heartbeat spiked, but my expression didn't change. "Come here," he said again, softer. He reached into his jacket. Not fast. Not threatening. Just practiced. Smooth. Calculated. I turned hard to the right, slipped down the row. He stepped quickly, cut me off again. I spun. Faked left. He moved with me. Too fast. Not reactive. Preemptive. His jacket opened slightly. I saw something dark hanging near his belt. A loop of cord, maybe. Or a strap. My mouth opened. I screamed. Not a yell. A warning. It echoed off the fabric walls like something trapped. The man stopped. His posture shifted. Shoulders up. Chin stiff. He stepped back and said, loud and flat, I was just joking around with him. Just like that. As if we were friends and I'd overreacted. Then Mom came around the corner, like she'd been shot out of a cannon. She was holding a yardstick. The wooden kind fabric stores used to measure cloth. She wasn't holding it to measure anything. She gripped it like a weapon. Like she was ready to swing. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't speak. She stepped between us. The man didn't flinch. He tipped his head, as if in apology, and walked straight out of the store. Didn't run. Didn't glance back. Just left. The bell above the door didn't even chime. A moment later, the clerk appeared from a door near the back holding a roll of elastic and blinking like she'd just woken up. She didn't say anything, and neither did Mom. She just grabbed my arm and steered me out the door like we'd just remembered a dentist appointment. We didn't talk until we were halfway down the road. Even then it was quiet. I tried to explain what he said. How he moved. How close he got. Mom didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't suggest maybe I misunderstood. She just said, you did everything right. And I believed her. That man wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He looked at me. At the layout. At the exits. He had a plan. I ruined it. I was 6 the summer my mom decided I should get out of the city for a while. She said it like it was a vacation, but I knew it was because she couldn't stand having me underfoot while lawyers swarmed the apartment, dividing her and my dad's life into piles and signatures. She told me I needed space to breathe. I think she needed space to cry where I wouldn't see. So she sent me to stay with my Uncle Vernon. Vernon's cabin sat on a ridge called Buren Hollow, 10 miles from the nearest paved road. The kind of place where you could scream your lungs out and no one would hear. He built it himself back in the 80s, all weathered pine boards and a stone chimney. There was no TV. One radio, usually off. No cell service. The nearest neighbor was a black bear family that liked to nose through the compost. The only bedroom upstairs was the loft, which became mine for the summer. It had a twin mattress so thin you could feel the wooden slats through the sheets, a 3-drawer dresser that groaned like a coffin lid when you opened it, and a single square window looking out toward the forest. The walls were unfinished, raw boards with splinters still clinging to them. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something dry and old, like the pages of a book no one had read in 50 years. The first few days moved like syrup. Vernon wasn't much of a talker. He spent most mornings splitting wood or fishing. I tagged along with Jasper, his half-blind coonhound, or wandered the tree line pretending to be braver than I was. Nights were a slow drift of cicada hum, the occasional whippoorwill, and the ceiling fan ticking in uneven rhythm over my bed. Until the night I woke up for no reason. No sound. No nightmare. Just awake. And there she was, standing in the window. Not in front of it, in it. Her whole body filled the frame, yet I could still see the trees behind her. She wasn't solid. More like mist caught in a beam of light. Faintly blue, like a TV left on mute in a dark room. She wore something white and loose. Not a dress exactly. More like a thin gown you might wear if you were sick in bed. The cloth clung in a way that made me squirm without knowing why, catching around her hips and chest like there was damp air pressing it against her. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf, though a few strands hung limp at her jaw. And in her arms, bundled in a patchwork quilt, was a sleeping baby. She didn't look at me at first. She just rocked the child in slow, rhythmic arcs, her arms moving in that hypnotic way mothers do when the world narrows to the weight they're holding. Then her eyes shifted. Met mine. She didn't blink. Didn't smile. Just saw me. The way you might see something you weren't supposed to, or catch someone reading your diary. Her gaze didn't scare me the way monsters do. It felt personal. Like she knew something about me. Something private. Then she was gone. One blink, and the window was empty. I lay awake until the light bled in over the ridge. The next night she came back, and the one after. Always the same, silent, swaying, the baby tucked under her chin. Sometimes her gown looked drier. Sometimes wetter, the cloth almost transparent, pulling tight enough that I could see the shadow of a knee or the outline of a breast before I turned away, ashamed to notice. It was wrong to stare, even if she wasn't alive. By the fifth night, I started expecting her. My eyes would snap open seconds before she appeared, as if some invisible thread pulled me upright. Once I smiled at her. She smiled back. Barely. Like someone remembering what it felt like to be happy. That was the night everything changed. I woke to use the bathroom. The loft stairs creaked under my bare feet as I padded down. The hall below was dark, but the shadows looked heavier than usual, thick and slow-moving, like underwater shapes. That's when I realized they were moving. Not shadows. People. Or something that wore the shape of people. Dozens of them, drifting in and out of the walls, circling the fireplace, sliding past furniture. They were black, but not like clothes, like empty space poured into the outline of a person. No faces. No eyes. Some too tall, their heads grazing the rafters. Others bent wrong at the joints, limbs bending where no limb should bend. They didn't notice me until I gasped. Every single one stopped. Turned toward me in perfect unison. I couldn't see their eyes, there weren't any, but I felt them. A cold that sank into my ribs and pressed, slow and deliberate, like a hand on my sternum. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then they vanished. Gone. The air thinned, but it wasn't relief. It felt like they'd just stepped behind a curtain, still there, still watching. I ran back upstairs, skin prickling as though someone's fingertips trailed behind me the whole way. After that, I learned to stay quiet. I'd lie still and let them drift through the house, pretending I wasn't awake. They ignored me so long as I didn't react. The woman in white kept coming, but her visits were shorter. Her rocking was tighter, the baby clutched higher against her chest. There was something different in her eyes now, sadness that looked like warning. The last night I saw her, she didn't wait for me to wake. She was already there when my eyes opened. No rocking, no baby, just standing, watching me. Her gown clung more than ever, wet, translucent in places. I tried not to look, but my eyes caught the curve of her ribs, the slope of a bare shoulder under the thin fabric. The sight made me blush, and her gaze sharpened, like she'd caught the thought. I don't know why, but that felt like a test. She turned her head toward the stairs. And without thinking, I followed. The hall below was black. No porch light. No moonlight. Shapes waited there. I could feel them. I closed my eyes and kept walking. Something brushed my shoulder, cold and slick, like a fish passing in the dark. Another shape pressed lightly against my back, weightless but wrong. I didn't open my eyes. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and something metallic. When I reached Vernon's bedroom, I stepped inside and shut the door. The pressure stopped. So did the cold. It was like the whole house exhaled. The woman never came back. Neither did the shadow people. For the rest of the summer, the nights were still. But I kept the curtains closed. We bought the cabin in late October, the kind of deal that makes you suspicious at first. Too cheap for the view it had. Too quiet for how close it was to Haven Ridge. It sat at the end of the road, past the last mile marker, past the gravel's shift into packed dirt, past where even delivery trucks bothered to go. Tucked into a wooded slope, surrounded by trees that leaned in toward the house like they were trying to overhear whatever went on inside. From the outside, it didn't look haunted. Just tired. A 90s build with a tin roof patched in mismatched sheets of metal, a porch that wrapped all the way around, and a screen door that had clearly lost a fight with the wind years ago. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something sweet rot, like a box of forgotten fruit in a pantry. Not overpowering. Just enough that you noticed. We'd bought it from a man named Glenn, a widower in his 60s with soft eyes and a way of talking that left big pauses between sentences. He said he was moving to Florida for the flat land and sunshine, but I could tell he just wanted to be somewhere without stairs. He told us his wife had died in the upstairs bedroom, but not in a tragic way. Peacefully, in her sleep, was how he put it. He said it the same way you'd mention someone had once been a schoolteacher. No weight to it. The day we moved in, it poured. That heavy Appalachian rain that turns gravel to mud in minutes and makes the trees look like they're sweating. We unloaded in a rush, groceries, bins, the 2 cats in their carriers wailing like banshees, and collapsed on an air mattress in the living room. We didn't bother going upstairs that night. Didn't unpack the boxes. By morning, one of the cats, Oscar, was dead. He was curled by the fireplace, paws tucked under his chest as if he'd simply gone to sleep. 7 years old. No health issues. The vet later said it could have been a saddle thrombus, quick, brutal, unstoppable. Maybe stress. Maybe the storm. His brother Max stayed glued to the big back window after that. For hours. Every day. Ears twitching, pupils wide, watching the trees like something was moving out there that only he could see. Some nights he'd bolt from the window and run down the hall, tail puffed, eyes fixed on nothing we could see. The hallway would be empty, but it always left me with the skin-prickle feeling of being caught looking the wrong way. I told myself cats were weird, but in the back of my head, I filed it under things to watch. The first missing thing happened in the loft. I was putting together a bookshelf, one of those flat-pack ones that come with a manual written by someone who clearly resented their job. I got to the last step, hammering on the 4 rubber feet. 3 were in the little plastic bag. The 4th was gone. I hadn't moved from the rug. The bag was still beside me. I checked every fold of the cardboard box. Even patted down Max like he might have swiped it for a toy. Nothing. 3 days later, I opened the mudroom closet to look for a flashlight. There it was, sitting neatly on the top shelf, next to a pair of knit gloves we didn't own. Then came the voices. I'd be in the living room and hear my partner call from the kitchen. "Hey, can you come here for a sec?" I'd answer, walk in, and they'd look at me like I was the one messing around. It started happening to both of us. The tone was always exactly right. No distortion. No muffling. Close enough you could feel it in your ribs. We stopped reacting. The first big noise came a week later. It was after midnight when something slammed above the upstairs bathroom. Not like a dropped object, more like someone had stomped across the attic. Later that night, it came again. This time from directly above the laundry room. We told ourselves it was old house noises. Until the day my partner came home to find the crucifix above our bed twisted sideways, tight enough that you could see the grooves from the force. Not loose. Not a nail giving out. The second I walked into the room, my chest tightened. Not panic. Not fear. Just a slow, steady pressure right behind the breastbone, as if something had placed a palm there and was pushing in. It would come and go in waves over the next few days. We made a pact after that, no messing with each other. No jokes. If something happened, we'd both treat it like it was real. I bought sage, amethyst, obsidian from the little shop in town. Laid salt lines along the windowsills. It didn't help. The lights flickered in rooms we weren't in. The bathroom faucet turned on by itself, full blast. One morning, I found every frame on our photo wall tilted at the exact same angle. I fixed them. By the next morning, they were tilted again. The house wanted us to know it could touch our things. Halloween brought the first outside witness. A couple was walking past with their little boy. He pointed at the house and said, "There's a goblin in there." We had no decorations up. No lights. Just windows and trees. The intimacy started after Christmas. I'd pause a movie and come back to find it playing. Once, I lined up a set of books and returned to find one open face down. Max would vanish for hours, only to be found staring into the hallway from the far end, ears flat. The nativity set we'd put on the mantel became a game, the figures rearranged daily. Baby Jesus ended up buried in a potted plant. The donkey in the kitchen. One morning, I came back from a smoke and heard music upstairs. A snow globe playing, one I hadn't touched in years, one that was sealed in a box under the bed. We found a butcher knife on the living room floor. Blade out. We hadn't cooked the night before. Another day, one of my partner's late grandmother's earrings appeared on my nightstand. The other was still locked in a jewelry box in storage. Then late one night came the tapping. 3 taps at the front door. Not knuckles. Something hollow like cheap plastic. I looked through the window. A skeleton arm, the kind you buy at the dollar store, was lifting and knocking. Slowly. Gently. No wind. No movement in the trees. And then our son was born. If you've ever had a newborn, you know sleep becomes a kind of hallucination. I'd often end up in the den after a late feeding, dozing in the rocker by the fire while the baby slept on my chest. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps directly above me. Slow. Pacing. It was the same spot where my home office used to be. The pacing stopped. The upstairs toilet flushed. A moment later, my husband appeared halfway down the stairs, yawning. "You call me?" he asked. "No. Were you just in the office?" "No," he said. and I could tell he meant it. The next escalation came when my mom visited. She'd offered to babysit, so we could have dinner out. We were gone 2 hours. When we pulled in, she was standing in the driveway, the baby clutched tight against her chest. She didn't wait for us to ask. "I don't want to scare you," she said, but someone tried to come in. She'd been rocking the baby near the front window when she heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy ones. Then 3 loud bangs on the front door. She opened it immediately. No one. No sound. She's never stayed overnight since. Our son started talking to the wall a few months later. I found him standing in the corner of his room, ear pressed to the plaster. Sometimes whispering. Sometimes just listening. When I asked, he said, "The lady in the wall tells me secrets." I laughed like it was a game. He didn't. "She says you don't believe me," he added. The last real thing he said about her was over dinner. He told us he'd seen Grandpa the day before. We assumed he meant my father, but he shook his head. "No, my other grandpa." My husband froze. His father had died 10 years ago. Our son had never met him. Never seen a photo. "What did he look like?" I asked. My son thought for a moment. "He looked like a girl with long hair and wings." He flew away into the sky. My husband got up and walked outside without a word. I still haven't walked that ridge trail since. I'd been planning the section hike for almost a year. Not the whole Appalachian Trail. I didn't have that kind of time or money, but enough to feel like I'd earned the brag. 90 miles from Hot Springs, North Carolina, down into Georgia. 6 days if the weather held. 7 if I wanted to take it slow. November isn't the most forgiving month for it, but that was part of the appeal. Less traffic. Less heat. Less chatter on the trail. I liked being alone. The first day was crisp and quiet. The air smelled faintly of pine and dry leaves, that mix of sweetness and decay you only get after the first frost. The white blaze marks on the trees stood out bright against the bark, those simple rectangles of paint every hiker knows like a lifeline. They're everywhere. Every couple 100 feet, there's one painted chest high on a trunk. You follow them like breadcrumbs, trusting that someone, some ranger, some volunteer, knows exactly where you're supposed to go. I set up camp in a small clearing just before sunset. Only passed 3 hikers all day, a retired couple moving slow and steady, and a solo guy heading north with a pace that said he wanted nothing to do with anyone. We nodded. That was it. The cold sank in fast after dark. I crawled into my bag early, listening to the small night sounds just beyond my tent wall. Day 2 was when I noticed the first one. It was maybe an hour after breaking camp. The white blaze ahead of me was wrong. Not drastically, just fresher. Brighter. Like it had been painted yesterday instead of last spring. The edges were sharp, not weather-softened like the others. It wasn't the paint that bothered me. It was the height. Most blazes are painted about chest level, easy for any hiker to spot. This one was at least 7 feet up the trunk. I'm 6 foot and still would have had to stretch to reach it. I told myself the tree might have grown taller since the last mark. Maybe it was a new blaze after trail maintenance and someone just felt like making it high. Weird, but not worth losing time over. By mid-afternoon, I saw another one. Fresh. Glossy in the light. And this one was at chest height, but the rectangle was slightly off. Too narrow, like whoever painted it didn't have the right stencil or wasn't paying attention. I passed it and kept going, but for the rest of the day, I caught myself glancing back over my shoulder more than usual. Day 3 was when it changed. The official guide says, 1 blaze means you're on the trail. 2 blazes mean the trail turns or something important is ahead. That morning, I started seeing pairs. At first I thought nothing of it. The trail did curve a lot that day, skirting along a slope with a steep drop to my right. But the spacing was wrong. Some pairs were too close together, 10 feet apart instead of 100. Others were where the trail was straight, with no reason for a warning. Then I passed a spot where the second blaze in the pair was different. Brighter. I slowed down. The fresh one was still tacky. I could see tiny ridges in it from the brush. I glanced around, half expecting to see a paint can stashed nearby, but the woods were empty. The rest of the day, the blazes seemed to lead me slightly off the main path. Not much, just enough that my boots found softer, less trodden dirt. The trees closed in a little tighter. I checked my GPS twice. It still showed I was on the but the GPS can only tell so much. Out here, you follow the paint. That's the whole point. Camp that night felt wrong. I set up in a low grove where the wind wouldn't cut through as bad. The leaves were thick on the ground, and for a while I listened to them shift in little bursts, maybe squirrels. Maybe not. At one point I unzipped the tent and shined my light across the trunks around me. There was a fresh blaze about 15 feet from camp. It hadn't been there when I set up. Day 4, I woke to frost on the tent and paint on the next tree over. Fresh again. Still sticky when I touched it. Someone was moving when I wasn't looking. I told myself maybe another hiker was leapfrogging me. Someone who carried paint for volunteer work and just happened to be moving at the same pace. It was a stretch, but the only explanation that didn't make my stomach tighten. Around noon, the trail markers stopped looking like rectangles. The proportions were off, taller, thinner. The edges weren't squared, and in one I swear there was the faint curve of another color underneath the white, like something had been painted over in a hurry. I kept moving. By late afternoon, the blazes were higher again. 7 feet up. 8. Some on trees, so thin they'd be hard to reach without bracing against another trunk. It was near sunset when I realized the markers were pulling me downhill. The ad is well documented. I'd studied this section. It wasn't supposed to drop this much in this short a stretch. The terrain felt wrong. Narrow switchbacks that didn't exist on my map, soil darker and wetter than anything I'd walked on in days. The air was still. No birds. No rustle. At one turn, the paint mark was on the back of the tree. The side you'd only see if you were walking toward it, not past it. I stopped cold. The woods were quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. I backtracked 5 minutes uphill and found the real trail again. The dirt lighter, the spacing of the blazes normal. That night I set up camp a little too close to the main trail. It felt safer than disappearing into the woods to find a hidden site. I woke once to footsteps in the leaves. Not running. Not wandering. Just walking. Past my tent. Then back again. I didn't move. When I finally unzipped the flap at first light, there was a white blaze on the tree directly in front of me. I'd camped off trail. That tree had been bare last night. Day 5 was just getting out. I didn't care about finishing the section. I wanted pavement under my boots and other people in sight. But the blazes shifted. I know how that sounds. But there's no other word for it. I'd reach a fork I knew wasn't supposed to be there, and both sides would have fresh white paint. I'd follow one, check GPS, find I'd drifted a quarter-mile from where I should be. Backtrack, and the blazes would look different, like I'd mistaken the path in the first place. Mid-morning, I saw the first human sign in 2 days, a plastic water bottle lying against a stump. The label was half peeled, the inside still wet. No other gear. No person. By early afternoon, the forest started to thin. I could hear the faint rush of traffic somewhere beyond the ridge. I was almost at a road crossing when I saw it. A blaze, fresh, wet, the brush strokes still obvious, on a tree maybe 20 feet off trail. Next to it, nailed to the bark, was a small wooden arrow, pointing deeper in. I kept walking. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I hit asphalt. I'd been working seasonal forestry contracts for years, bouncing from one national park to another depending on the month and the budget. Trail clearing. Debris removal. A lot of chainsaw work. It didn't make me rich, but I liked the solitude. That summer, my assignment was in the Great Smoky Mountains, 3 trails, all at higher elevation. 2 of them were routine. The third was different. It was labeled Low Gap Spur on the topo map, a thread of a trail that split off from a main route and went nowhere. No loops. No campsites. No side trails. Just ended. When the head ranger slid the packet across his desk, he didn't say much. Just, "You won't see anyone out there. That one's been forgotten." It was early, not even 6, when I parked at the gravel turnout. My truck was the only vehicle in the lot. The storm from the night before had left the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. The kind of damp that clings to your clothes before you even start moving. I strapped the saw across my back, set my walkie to channel 5, and stepped onto the trail. The forest swallowed me fast. The path was worse than I expected, not just overgrown but neglected. Whole segments were half erased by erosion. Switchbacks buried under brambles. Fallen logs forcing detours through slick, root-tangled slopes. It didn't feel like something forgotten. It felt left behind. About 2 miles in, I hit my first blowdown. A fat oak, roots half out of the ground like they'd been pried loose. I dropped my pack, pulled the saw, and started cutting. That's when I heard it. A whistle. Not a bird call. Not wind. A clean, controlled string of 8 or 9 notes. Slow. Deliberate. It came from above me, somewhere up the ridge, maybe 20 or 30 yards off trail. I stopped cutting, listened. The air was dead still. No insects. No movement in the leaves. I cupped my hands and called out. Hello. No answer. Then, a few seconds later, the whistle again. Same notes. Same slow pace. Same pitch. This time it stopped mid-note. Something about that pause hit me harder than the sound itself. Like whoever, or whatever, was making it had just noticed me listening. I wanted to write it off. A hiker. A kid messing around. Hell, maybe someone camping illegally. But if they were up there, they'd heard my saw running. They'd know I wasn't just another hiker. They weren't answering. I finished cutting the trunk fast, the sound of the saw suddenly too loud in my own ears, and moved on. The second blowdown was another mile in. An old pine, collapsed in a slow, twisting fall, its branches already decomposed into the forest floor. I dropped my gear again, braced the trunk with my boot, and started the saw. 2 minutes in, over the sound of the chain, I felt it. That prickling between the shoulder blades. The sense of being watched. I killed the saw and turned toward the slope. Nothing. Then, a soft crunch of leaves uphill. 2 steps. Maybe 3. Slow. Careful. And then the whistle again. Closer. Same notes. Same timing. Still stopping mid-phrase. I didn't call out this time. Instead, I reached for the hatchet on my belt. The slope above me was steep, a tangle of roots and deadfall. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The whistle stopped. The air was so still I could hear my own breathing. I backed off the trunk, hooked the saw back onto my harness, and started moving fast. I didn't run. Not yet. Running downhill on a trail like that gets you hurt fast. But my pace picked up enough that I was sweating despite the cool air. That's when I saw the footprints. Human. Barely smaller than mine, maybe a size 9. Pressed deep into a patch of soft dirt just off trail. Too fresh to be more than a couple of hours old. They pointed in the direction I'd just come from. I followed them a few feet into the brush. They stopped abruptly. Not faded. Not scuffed. Just stopped. Like the person had stepped forward once, and vanished. I crouched, scanning for broken branches, bent grass, any sign they'd moved on. That's when the whistle started again. This time from down the slope. Too close. I didn't think. I just turned and pushed myself into a half-jog, boots slipping in mud, ducking under branches. The forest felt thicker. The air heavier. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. Then I heard it again. Behind me. No longer above or below. Just following. Not rushing. Not closing the distance fast. Just matching my pace. And still whistling. Each note a little sharper now, like whoever was making it was putting more breath into it, more attention. That did it. I ran. Branches whipped my arms. Mud slid under my boots. The saw thudded against my back with every stride. When the truck came into view, the silver gleam of sunlight off the windshield, my legs nearly gave out. I didn't look behind me. I yanked the door open, slammed it shut, locked it, and started the engine with shaking hands. Back at the ranger station, I told them the trail was flagged but unfinished. When they asked why, I just said, something's not right out there. Clay, the head ranger, quiet guy mid-50s, just looked at me for a long time. Then he said, Low Gap Spur used to be active. Early 2000s. We had a guy out there, Henry Morrow. Dependable. Worked alone most days. I waited. Henry liked to whistle when he worked. Same little tune over and over. Said it kept the bears away. I didn't say anything. One day he didn't come back, Clay said. We found his truck. Never found him. Dogs couldn't catch a scent. Place just swallowed him. I haven't set foot on Low Gap Spur since. We bought the cabin in late October, the kind of deal that makes you suspicious at first. Too cheap for the view it had. Too quiet for how close it was to Haven Ridge. It sat at the end of the road, past the last mile marker, past the gravel's shift into packed dirt, past where even delivery trucks bothered to go. Tucked into a wooded slope, surrounded by trees that leaned in toward the house like they were trying to overhear whatever went on inside. From the outside, it didn't look haunted. Just tired. A 90s build with a tin roof patched in mismatched sheets of metal, a porch that wrapped all the way around, and a screen door that had clearly lost a fight with the wind years ago. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something sweet rot, like a box of forgotten fruit in a pantry. Not overpowering. Just enough that you noticed. We'd bought it from a man named Glenn, a widower in his 60s with soft eyes and a way of talking that left big pauses between sentences. He said he was moving to Florida for the flat land and sunshine, but I could tell he just wanted to be somewhere without stairs. He told us his wife had died in the upstairs bedroom, but not in a tragic way. Peacefully, in her sleep, was how he put it. He said it the same way you'd mention someone had once been a schoolteacher. No weight to it. The day we moved in, it poured. That heavy Appalachian rain that turns gravel to mud in minutes and makes the trees look like they're sweating. We unloaded in a rush, groceries, bins, the 2 cats in their carriers wailing like banshees, and collapsed on an air mattress in the living room. We didn't bother going upstairs that night. Didn't unpack the boxes. By morning, one of the cats, Oscar, was dead. He was curled by the fireplace, paws tucked under his chest as if he'd simply gone to sleep. 7 years old. No health issues. The vet later said it could have been a saddle thrombus, quick, brutal, unstoppable. Maybe stress. Maybe the storm. His brother Max stayed glued to the big back window after that. For hours. Every day. Ears twitching, pupils wide, watching the trees like something was moving out there that only he could see. Some nights he'd bolt from the window and run down the hall, tail puffed, eyes fixed on nothing we could see. The hallway would be empty, but it always left me with the skin prickle feeling of being caught looking the wrong way. I told myself cats were weird, but in the back of my head, I filed it under things to watch. The first missing thing happened in the loft. I was putting together a bookshelf, one of those flat-pack ones that come with a manual written by someone who clearly resented their job. I got to the last step, hammering on the 4 rubber feet. 3 were in the little plastic bag. The 4th was gone. I hadn't moved from the rug. The bag was still beside me. I checked every fold of the cardboard box. Even patted down Max like he might have swiped it for a toy. Nothing. 3 days later, I opened the mudroom closet to look for a flashlight. There it was, sitting neatly on the top shelf, next to a pair of knit gloves we didn't own. Then came the voices. I'd be in the living room and hear my partner call from the kitchen. "Hey, can you come here for a sec?" I'd answer, walk in, and they'd look at me like I was the one messing around. It started happening to both of us. The tone was always exactly right. No distortion. No muffling. Close enough you could feel it in your ribs. We stopped reacting. The first big noise came a week later. It was after midnight when something slammed above the upstairs bathroom. Not like a dropped object, more like someone had stomped across the attic. Later that night, it came again. This time from directly above the laundry room. We told ourselves it was old house noises. Until the day my partner came home to find the crucifix above our bed twisted sideways, tight enough that you could see the grooves from the force. Not loose. Not a nail giving out. The second I walked into the room, my chest tightened. Not panic. Not fear. Just a slow, steady pressure right behind the breastbone, as if something had placed a palm there and was pushing in. It would come and go in waves over the next few days. We made a pact after that, no messing with each other. No jokes. If something happened, we'd both treat it like it was real. I bought sage, amethyst, obsidian from the little shop in town. Laid salt lines along the windowsills. It didn't help. The lights flickered in rooms we weren't in. The bathroom faucet turned on by itself, full blast. One morning, I found every frame on our photo wall tilted at the exact same angle. I fixed them. By the next morning, they were tilted again. The house wanted us to know it could touch our things. Halloween brought the first outside witness. A couple was walking past with their little boy. He pointed at the house and said, "There's a goblin in there." We had no decorations up. No lights. Just windows and trees. The intimacy started after Christmas. I'd pause a movie and come back to find it playing. Once, I lined up a set of books and returned to find one open face down. Max would vanish for hours, only to be found staring into the hallway from the far end, ears flat. The nativity set we'd put on the mantel became a game, the figures rearranged daily. Baby Jesus ended up buried in a potted plant. The donkey in the kitchen. One morning, I came back from a smoke and heard music upstairs. A snow globe playing, one I hadn't touched in years, one that was sealed in a box under the bed. We found a butcher knife on the living room floor. Blade out. We hadn't cooked the night before. Another day, one of my partner's late grandmother's earrings appeared on my nightstand. The other was still locked in a jewelry box in storage. Then late one night came the tapping. 3 taps at the front door. Not knuckles. Something hollow like cheap plastic. I looked through the window. A skeleton arm, the kind you buy at the dollar store, was lifting and knocking. Slowly, gently, no wind, no movement in the trees. And then our son was born. If you've ever had a newborn, you know sleep becomes a kind of hallucination. I'd often end up in the den after a late feeding, dozing in the rocker by the fire while the baby slept on my chest. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps directly above me. Slow, pacing.